I'll tell you what, if you will buy this Mercy powertrain from me, I'll give you the Lykan. After a rental customer blew up the motor in my first Lamborghini Gallardo, I turned the original motor into a coffee table. But after I sold off supercar rentals, I ended up actually selling the motor and the table setup as well to a guy in Florida that had a twin turbo manufacturing company for Lamborghinis, and he was prototyping some things, and so he wanted it as kind of a mock-up and to try to salvage what he could. And he pulled the heads off and a few other things and called me one day and said, "Hey Ed, do you want the bare block? We've taken everything off that we could use. It's got these huge holes in the side. We're just gonna scrap it." I'm like, "Of course." And so he sent it back to me, and the bare, beautiful engine block was actually a lot cooler than the fully assembled long block with the intake plenum and the heads and everything on there, because it just looked so raw and perfect for decorative use. And so it once again became a coffee table, but in 2012 and early 13, as I was scraping together literally every dollar I could come up with to put together all the countermeasures and the planning for the Cannonball record attempt, I ended up selling it for $3,000 to a guy off the internet that had been looking for one on Lambo Power to have a decorative engine block. And I always kind of regretted it. I mean, obviously I did need the money at that time, but it was one of those things that was just such a perfect artifact of my time in the exotic car rental business that I have missed it at times. And a few months ago, Matt Mormon from Obsessed Garage called me and he's like, "Hey Ed, I saw your new garage and we've kind of been looking for a new Obsessed Garage project. I've got a lot of sponsors that are interested in kind of coming together and putting together the dream garage somewhere else." Obviously, he can't keep redoing his own garage. And I'm like, "Of course, man, come up whenever you want." And so we started talking about different strategies and products and things that were going to be involved. And he's going to come up here in a month or two and start doing a big renovation here in my garage. And that's awesome. I'm excited about that. But I started thinking, I've got these high ceilings. It would be so cool if I could get a blown up Lamborghini engine block, maybe even my old one or a V12 from a Mercy, and make kind of like a steampunk chandelier with some Edison bulbs coming out of the cylinders and stuff like that. I thought that'd just be so cool. So I made a post on Facebook. I said, "Hey, does anybody have a blown Lamborghini block laying around? I'd like to make the coolest chandelier ever for my garage." And got a few responses, but nothing really concrete. I really did want at this point a V12, and unlike the V10s and the Gallardos, Mercy engines just don't blow that often. They're a lot more solid. They don't rev quite as high, and there aren't as many of them. So you just never see them laying around. There's plenty of motors out of crashed cars, but they want, functional value out of them, $15,000, $20,000, $30,000. And it certainly doesn't make sense for a decorative use to do something like that. And so I didn't know if we were going to come up with anything, but one day I get a call from Freddie Tavarish, and he says, "Hey Ed, are you still looking for a Mercy motor?" I said, "Well, yes, as long as it's cheap enough to make sense." He said, "Well, there's a guy called Sam Hard from the UK." I said, "Well, I've heard of Sam. We just had Rob tell his story about hanging out with Sam in London while he was there to do a car show." I said, "I know who Sam is." And he said, "Well, Sam has the entire powertrain out of one of the sister cars to Freddie's '03 Mercy from Fast and Furious 8. He said the one that they used for Fast and Furious Live, the stadium show that sort of followed the Fast and Furious 8 release, and featured some of the Fast and Furious 7 stuff and just a whole bunch of weird Fast and Furious history stuff that was never known to be very successful." He said they used another one of the 2003 Canadian Mercies, and they took all the powertrain out and they put a Jag motor and transmission in it. And so Sam has all the stuff they took out, and he wants to talk to you because I told him that I didn't really want all this stuff, but Ed might. I said, "Well, sure, pass along his number." So Sam calls, and he does have everything, which is kind of unique because you really can't swap an E-Gear Mercy to a stick without having everything that would be taken out of a stick car. So it's prohibitive from a parts buying, perspective. You need all the control modules, the whole gearbox, really the whole engine, and you just would have to swap it all. I mean, there probably is some way to hack through it, but the Driftworks guy in the UK has been trying to swap his LP640 to a stick and ended up having to go to, standalone engine management, independent throttle bodies, and all sorts of things that really make it not exactly a manual LP640. Of course, this wouldn't work for a 640, but it would work for an early car. And so I was like, "Look, I understand this is really valuable, but I don't need all that, and it certainly is overkill to just make a chandelier out of." And he's like, "Well, I'd love for you to have it. I think it'd be cool to figure out what happens with it." I said, "Well, look, I appreciate that, but it's just not worth that to me." He said, "Well, I might have something else that you might be interested in." He said, "Do you remember the Lykan Hypersport from Fast and Furious 7? I said, Of course, the one that jumped between the buildings in Dubai. Awesome car, one of 7. They sold new for $3.4 million. You never really see them transact. I knew that W Motors had come out with another car, the Finier, and that was sort of touring, but certainly an interesting car, not something I would necessarily call beautiful, but impressive performance, at least in theory. You never really saw a track test of them or anything like that, but I knew there were kind of some ties with Roof and that they'd done the powertrains, and it had their 3.8 liter flat six kind of from the CTR3, so a super cool car in that regard, but again, I'd never even seen one in person. He said, well, they made several for the movie, and then some of them became the cars for Fast and Furious Live. And that wasn't precisely true. They actually made several fake ones out of the shells using the body molds from W Motors, and they had a real one that is still in the W Motors showroom in Dubai that Shmi just featured on his channel. And then there were some that were destroyed, obviously. They slid them through buildings. They had the one that fell to the ground and was obviously destroyed. And none of the cars actually survived the fake ones from the movie. Even the real one had some damage to it. But they were then allowed to make 2 for Fast and Furious Live. And one was done as a functional car built on top of a Porsche Boxster chassis, which makes sense because the CTR3 is a stretch Boxster chassis as well. And then they had another one that was just a shell on kind of a rolling tube frame, and they used that for a stunt where apparently they would fire it out of the nose of an airplane. But apparently as well, they had their insurance agent see this stunt in the first showing of Fast and Furious Live in some stadium, and it was filled with fireworks, and they launched this car kind of in the direction of part of the audience, and they shut that part down. So as far as I understand it, this was only used in the practice runs and in this first showing, and then there was this shell that Sam had somehow found that was just sitting in the UK for years and years. And after the bankruptcy liquidation from the Fast and Furious Live entity, where Universal was kind of denied access to buy all this stuff, that's where Sam bought his Charger and the Eclipse and a Jetta and the truck they used to take cars off the train. So many fun artifacts of the Fast and Furious franchise. There was just a lot of really interesting stuff there. And so he had this thing and he's like, I don't really know what to do with it. It's like a 1-to-1 model of this car, and it was authorized by W Motors, by Lykan, and the molds they had to use had to be destroyed. So the other one apparently is in Dubai, where a Fast and Furious enthusiast collector of cars has all the other replicas as well, has this one, but it's not a complete body. There's some missing parts. Maybe he doesn't have the doors and things like that. And he's like, look, I'll tell you what, if you will buy this Mercy powertrain from me, I'll give you the Lykan. And I'm like, I don't know what either of these things is worth, but surely if I can get all this stuff to Atlanta from the UK, I can just sell one or the other and make my money back on the whole shebang, and then I'll just use the other as a chandelier. Maybe I'll hang the Lykan upside down from the ceiling the way people do with Indy cars and stuff like that. I mean, some whatever. We'll figure out something. Let's just work on getting him here. So I agree to that. I send him some money, and we begin the multi-month process of trying to get him to clear customs, explain that yes, that's a motor, yes, that's a car shell. They're not designed to go together. Neither are expected to be on the road at any point. Let's just please let them through. And finally, I got them all to clear customs. And a few days ago, it all arrived. And so now I have all these parts thrown about in my garage from the Lamborghini. We were able to pull the Lykan shell in. It doesn't turn or anything. Literally, it was just built to be thrown into the air and bounce. So a lot of the leading edges of all the panels are cracked, and it's made out of fiberglass, obviously not carbon fiber. So it's actually quite heavy. I mean, you can push it around, but I don't really know. I mean, I think in some way, somehow, you could make it fit on top of a Porsche Boxster chassis and make another functional version of this car. That's certainly beyond any project that I would undertake, but I don't really know what I'm going to do with it. I think it's a fascinating thing to have around. I'm going to get it cleaned up a little bit, kind of put back together, and who knows? I was able to pull it out, put it by the Mercy, and get a convincing enough thumbnail to get you to click on this, but I think it's a fascinating thing. I mean, movie cars are always interesting because you just never really know what they're going to become, where they've been, what they've been through. And this was such an elaborate production, and all the Lykan scenes were actually shot just down in downtown Atlanta in different buildings and things like that. So kind of a cool tie to Atlanta. Obviously, we're all Fast and Furious fans, and I love the fact that this is from the last movie that we got to see Paul Walker in. I mean, I think that it was a fun one the way that they did. It was emotional the way that they ended it. And so just seeing him and Vin Diesel, driving through an apartment and then obviously farcically jumping across multiple buildings in Dubai was crazy. So I don't know what's going to end up happening with it. I don't know what I'm going to end up doing with the Mercy. I've offered it to a couple of friends that have e-gear cars that, theoretically could put everything in there and swap the ECUs and the harnesses and everything and probably turn their cars into sticks. And with the premiums that the manual cars bring, that is starting to make a lot more sense. But, at the very least, it's a really cool thing and a conversation piece to have around. We did have Sam Hard while he was here telling the story of his NAS Charger and some of his other, project cars and things that he's done for SEMA, kind of tell the story of how he came to have the Lykan, which was a fascinating and amazing tale. So I'll run that sometime in the next couple of weeks. But it was just a crazy thing to stumble upon. Now that a few people have figured out that I have the car, I've gotten some strange calls from some billionaires that want to hang it on the walls of their garage, but I don't know. We'll see. I think if it's going to hang anywhere, it's going to be from my ceiling in an Obsessed Garage video that you'll see fairly soon. But if not, who knows? Maybe we can find somebody to put it back together and get it going down the road with some kind of VIN attached to it. This month's car stories are sponsored by The Ridge. The Ridge makes a line of wallets and bags that are designed to be minimalist and help us just take with us the things we actually need. So check out the link in the description below for a discount and buy one for yourself, or they make great Christmas presents. And be sure to let them know how thankful you are for their support of VINwiki.